Okay, I think we can get started. Now, a warm welcome to everyone joining the event. We have a large number of attendees today, which is fantastic to see. I'd like to briefly introduce myself to start. My name is Ann-Herred Lang. I'm the Executive Director of PHAP, that's short for the International Association of Professionals in Humanitarian Assistance and Protection, and I am delighted to be serving as your co-host today for this webinar entitled Risk Management and Funding Partnerships, organized by ICFA and PHAP. This is the fifth event in the ICFA learning stream on risk management in practice. I'm joined today by my co-host, once again, Jeremy Rempel, Head of Humanitarian Finance at ICFA. Great to be with you on the line again, Jeremy. Hello.
Hello, Ann-Herred. Yes. Greetings and good to be with you as well. Welcome to all the participants and looking forward to another excellent discussion in our risk management series.
So this has been a long-running series on risk management, this learning series, and so far we have primarily focused on the role of risk management for internal decision-making for NGOs. However, it is important to extend this thinking also to external funding relationships. So that's what we are looking at today. Risk management practices are playing an increasingly important role in partner selection and engagement when NGOs receive funding from UN agencies or government donors, both in the decision to offer funding and in the terms and conditions of partnership once a grant is secured. We'll be joined today by three speakers who will help shed some light on how different actors are approaching this topic. But before we turn to our panel, I would like to ask you, Jeremy, if you could please provide us with a bit of background to today's session and what our specific goals are with the engagement today. Over to you, Jeremy.
Great. Thanks, Ann-Herred. As has been the tradition, I'll take just a couple minutes here at the start to set the stage for our conversation. And I think we won't do a major recap, but helpful to run through quickly some of the fundamentals when it comes to risk management and how it will feed into our discussion today. As we shared at the beginning, this is not the first in our risk management series. Actually, we're at the fifth point here. As you can see on the screen, we've already discussed a few key topics around organizational culture, principled action and conversation on risk, security risk, risk appetite and tolerance, and now risk management and funding partnerships. So one in the ongoing series of risk management topics. And a couple of key points, I think, to keep in mind around why we do risk management. So first, important to remember that all of us do it, whether we recognize it or not. We might not always be using the same language or the same process, but consideration of risk is something that we do in some form, all of us. So important to think about how we can better capture that systematically and explicitly, not just something that's in the subconscious. And a key point, it's not just done to serve the interests of others, funders, donors, or to achieve a tick list requirement for due diligence. Important to recognize that good risk management, it's a basic element of a well-functioning organization. It should be something that we use in decision-making and feed into practical work decisions, not just a task that's done independently. I will, though, come back to that second bullet. I think overall important to recognize, as you see on the screen, that when we manage risk better, it's part of our approach to effectively serving the needs of people. So it's not just something we do for our internal needs, but it actually makes us more effective at what is hopefully our mission as humanitarians, serving the needs of people. Now, that second point on not done only to serve the interests of funders or donors, that obviously links clearly to our topic for today. So good to dig into that point a little bit. Oops, sorry. Right. So although it's not done only to serve the interests of funders or donors, it is key to think about the relationship between our internal risk management practice and the implications that that has for how we engage in funding relationships. And I think it's important to think about how we find the right balance between the risk management practices of our funders, our own internal risk management practices as NGOs, and the role that plays in accepting funding. And as I said earlier, important that we think about moving beyond a tick list approach, really to consider how well risk management systems are functioning and feeding into our decision-making processes as NGOs. I think important to remember a couple of definitions that are key as we get into our funding decision discussion. As I pointed out earlier, we've done a separate webinar on this specific topic, risk appetite and risk tolerance. But good to remember the definitions. Briefly, risk appetite being the amount of risk an organization is prepared to pursue or take on. A risk tolerance being an organization's readiness to bear risk. So you could think of risk appetite as the willingness or desire to take on risk, where risk tolerance is the ability to manage risk. So willingness versus ability or to handle the risk. I think good to remember those definitional differences. Also briefly good to remember the potential gap that exists between appetite and tolerance. This again is something we've covered in our previous webinars, but good to frame again for this conversation. One thing we frequently see in work with NGOs is on the donor or funding agency side, a situation where risk tolerance can be above risk appetite. Risk appetite's frequently lower than tolerance, whereas on the NGO side or partner side, we frequently see a high risk appetite, particularly for humanitarian partners working in humanitarian contexts, whereas the tolerance or the ability to manage those risks can be lower. And when this gap exists, we have the potential willingness to accept funding when you're unprepared to effectively manage the risk associated with that funding. That's something we'll get into more today, how to make sure we're careful to use risk management tools, thinking, etc., in our funding decisions to avoid a scenario where our risk appetites on the partner side are significantly outpacing our risk tolerance. So a couple of key points again as we get into the funding decision discussion. I think important to think about when we say yes or no to funding. This is true for all stakeholders, particularly true for NGO partners, humanitarian partners. It's never popular to think about when to say no to funding, but it is an important part of how we use risk management tools and important for us to think about. As I've said already, one of the key benefits to good risk management, obviously improved decision-making. Hopefully we're actually using those tools in our decision-making. And as we've said already, this is relevant both for our internal organizational decisions and external funding decisions. We don't only use risk management tools for internal decisions, also important to think about how we use risk management in our external decisions when it comes to accepting funding. And a couple of key questions then to think about when we do that. Can we meet the expectations of the funder? Funders have various requirements, expectations, compliance requirements, etc. Important for us to think in advance before we accept funding. Can we meet those requirements? Likelihood that we'll be able to comply with either regulation, legal requirements, compliance requirements in general. Good to think about those before we say yes to the money. And a couple of goals as we get into the conversation today, I think should be clear by now that we're trying to better understand the role of risk management in funding partnerships. We'll have an opportunity to hear both from a funder UN agency perspective, also from NGO partner perspectives today. And in the following discussion, hopefully we can identify some of the challenges. We'll particularly from a local partner perspective, we'll be able to hear from Mohammed Ahmad in Pakistan, examples of good practice, how tools are being used. I think Tobias Nyondov with World Vision will share some of those and get into discussing gaps in the systems or process. So hopefully set the stage for some good discussion on both what good practice is out there and where we might need to improve in our work as well, or use of risk management in funding decisions. With that, I think I can conclude our brief introduction. I'm looking forward to the discussion today and happy to turn it back over to you, Ingrid.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. So yes, as mentioned, we are joined by three speakers today who will be providing their experiences of this topic from three different perspectives. So first we'll hear from Rob Hurt, head of the Implementation Management and Assurance Service at UNHCR, about their reforms for how they approach partnerships and the role of risk assessments in that regard. Warm welcome to you, Rob.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you with us on the line. Second, we are joined by Tobias Nyondo, Global Director for Grants and Program Finance at World Vision International, who will tell us about how they use risk management in their decision-making processes regarding whether to take on funding or not. Welcome, Tobias.
Thank you so much, Ingrid, and glad to be part of this event. Looking forward to the discussion.
Fantastic, and we're so glad you were able to join us. Finally, we'll also be hearing from Mohammed Ahmad, Executive Director of IDEA Pakistan and Chairperson of the National Humanitarian Network, NHN Pakistan, who will be sharing his perspectives on some of the challenges faced by NGOs regarding risk management in the context of funding partnerships. Welcome to you, Mohammed.
Hello, hi everybody. Thanks for the invitation, and hope that we will have a good discussion today.
Our pleasure, and I certainly hope so too. Very much appreciate, Mohammed, that you're able to be a part of it today. So I would like to turn first to Rob. At UNHCR, you have been looking at how you approach partnerships to see how these processes could be improved. Could you tell us a bit about this process and how it relates to risk management? Rob, you have the floor.
Thanks very much for this invitation and for the opportunity to talk to you today. I understand I only have a few minutes, and I do have a presentation that will address that point. I will try to keep it brief. There's a lot that I could speak about, but I'll try and just zoom in on the most salient points. Looking forward to a rich discussion. So UNHCR, much of what we do is courtesy of the partners that we work with. And every year, UNHCR works with approximately 1,000 partners to whom we provide some form of funding or financial assistance. So we work with 1,000 partners. About 62% of those are national or local NGOs, civil society organisations, 17% being international NGOs, 19% being government partners, and just a couple UN partnership agreements. The number of project agreements that we have is 1,700. The difference between those two graphs is that international NGOs, because they operate in multiple countries, they have more than one agreement at any one time. And the total value of the money that we put through partnership with these partners is about $1.4 billion each year. We have a range of different partners that we work with. And we obviously operate in all regions of the world where there are displaced persons, refugees, internally displaced persons, or stateless persons. So we are operating with our partners in the most challenging and risky contexts and environments. And the type of projects that we're working on together really span the whole gamut of the humanitarian and into the developmental divide. So it's a huge range of partnerships, lots of different forms of partners working in all places in the world. And we find that some of our partners have very strong and well-developed and robust internal control frameworks. Others have some opportunity for further strengthening. And the risk, the purely financial risk that's inherent within our agreements varies significantly. Many of our projects have small financial values to them, while there are others that go into millions of dollars. So we're really talking about a massive spectrum of partnership agreements that we have with organisations. And what we are wanting to do as we reform our framework for implementing with partners is to be more, to appreciate that each of our partners, each of our projects, each of our contexts carries with it different risk. There we want to differentiate, distinguish between these different projects, different partners, different collaborations, and determine the controls that we embed within our agreements so that they are commensurate or respectful of the level of risk. So this diagram represents the fact that we consider our framework for implementing with partners to have two dimensions. It's the across the top, it's the selection of our partners, the formalization of the agreement, the implementation and monitoring, and then the closure of project agreements. And we think in terms of the level of support that our systems, our structures, our people and our processes provide to each of those stages of the partnership cycle. And what we're wanting to do is to ensure that the systems, structures, people and processes are really working in the most optimal, cost-effective way, and that we are working in true collaboration and partnership with those organisations that we work with. And in this regard, we sincerely hope that our partners see us as a partner and not just as a donor. So as we go through this journey, we are trying to move away from being one of those UN organisations that has traditionally been considered as having some of the heaviest and most bureaucratic processes. And as we work towards simplification, as we move to a situation where we are trusting and giving our partners more flexibility, more scope to change course in the course of a project, we must not lose the need to also provide assurance to our upstream stakeholders. And Jeremy already mentioned donors, and we do need to be able to provide assurance to them that the money that they're entrusting to us and that we are entrusting to our partners is achieving the most amount of results, quality and quantity for those who are most in need. So what we are looking to improve quality of our programs through simplified, efficient and transparent processes, and through strengthening of internal controls to address risk. So we, in terms of what we're wanting to, the direction that we're taking, we're wanting to strengthen our ability to avoid partnering with organisations who have proven not to be able to adhere to minimum standards expected of the United Nations. And in this regard, we want to be able to work in collaboration with other UN agencies and ensure that we are committed to this, but this does not result in overly bureaucratic and heavy processes and registration requirements for partner organisations who are interested in seeking funding opportunities through us. Secondly, we want to ensure that we differentiate between our partners so that those who have strong track records and strong internal controls, that we give them the maximum freedom and flexibility necessary for them to be able to use the resources that we put at their disposal and use them as they see fit, provided that they stay within the overall budget and they achieve the results that they say that they will. But they should be given maximum flexibility there with limited controls and checkpoints with us. And those partners who have been assessed as needing some further opportunity for improvement of internal controls, we want to work with them to see how we might be able to assist them in that journey. I don't like to use the term capacity building because that carries with it a perception that somehow we know better, and that is not the position that we want to take. We would really like to see how we can actively assist organisations who are on their own path of developing stronger frameworks for management. During the implementation cycle, we want to make the reporting and monitoring processes as simple and efficient as possible, with limited number of reports. The complexity of the reports should be as simple as possible, using reports that can be easily and automatically generated from the partner's own systems and not have to be converted into our own templates. And we want to be able to improve our collective monitoring of the success of the what is being implemented by integrating into that process as much feedback from the most important people, and that are the clients, the refugees, the displaced persons and stateless individuals. So we're looking at ways of bringing AAP mechanisms, or accountability to affected populations mechanisms, into this cycle. And finally, we will continue to rely on after-the-fact financial audits of many of our partnership agreements, but we need to ensure that we maximise the use of these opportunities by having these auditors carry out these assessments of internal controls and thereby enabling partners to develop an improved assessment of their own internal control strengths and weaknesses for their own benefit, but also give them the opportunity to benefit from more flexibility in future agreements with us. I'll just very, very quickly, and trying to wrap up as quickly as possible, just say a little bit more about this idea of differentiating between different forms of partners. So the concept is, and I don't have time to take you all through this, but if we've been working with an organisation for in the past, then it may well be that we have already benefited from assessments of their own internal controls. And if they're considered to have a very strong set of internal controls, then they have the opportunity to sign future agreements so that they have a smaller number of instalments. They get larger first instalments than others. They have reduced reporting requirements, and there are reduced performance monitoring requirements, and that the budgetary flexibility that they have built into the agreement is increased to the absolute maximum. And if we're able to effectively implement this, and we've taken some efforts to do so, if we're able to effectively implement this, then I believe that we'll be working truly in a spirit of partnership and ensuring that we benefit from the strength of those internal controls of our partners, and we can ensure that we are giving other partners the opportunity to strengthen their own systems and benefit from high levels of flexibility for future agreements. I know that I spoke quite quickly, and there's a lot of content in here, but I hope that with the few words that I've made that I might have inspired a couple of people to ask some questions. Delighted to hear from you now, colleagues. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Rob. We do have some questions coming in. I'd like to start with perhaps a batch of 3 questions for you now, and then as more come in, hopefully we can take those up in the Q&A towards the end of the session. But let me pose a few to you now. First, from Abdirazak in Somalia, who asks, what is the best way to carry out a risk review for an implementing partner remotely, especially with the current travel restriction limitations due to the COVID-19 pandemic? How is UNHCR approaching this challenge? We have also a second question from Irene in Chad, who is asking, are aspects of PSEA-related risks also reviewed through this process for funding? What are the implications of such a risk rating for an organization for UNHCR partnerships? And finally, from Jock in Senegal, we have the question, how can we ensure that risk assessments done by donors and agencies are shared systematically with NGOs? How can we use those assessments to improve the work and improve the partnerships? So back to you, Rob, with those questions.
Thanks very much. Really good questions, and I really need to try and be brief in my response, although I could speak for another 20 minutes on each of them. The first one, indeed, COVID-19 and the travel restrictions and social distancing that we experienced last year really highlighted the need for all of us collectively to have stronger monitoring systems that can be implemented remotely and from a distance. There are some really promising and great innovative techniques that are available today to help mitigate risk. And I think that we all need to study those and use them wherever possible. I could dive into that a little bit further, but the question was specifically how would we do a risk review remotely? I guess maybe I won't answer it directly, but one thing that I really see such massive potential for is to better integrate into the implementation and monitoring phase a greater opportunity for persons of concern, refugees and stateless, to be the ones to report upon performance at any location, any site, any point of delivery. Their feedback on what has been received in terms of quantity, in terms of quality, in terms of usefulness, all of these things should not just be put into client feedback mechanisms or into helplines and simply get lost. They generate a massive amount of data that if we're able to harness, capture, filter, quality assure, and then share with partners, it will enable us to be using our clients as the eyes and the ears on the ground. The stronger we can create that connection between those that we're accountable to and the organizations who are responsible for delivery of those services, the stronger the internal controls will be assessed to be. And that is really, it's such a crucial area that we need to develop together. Secondly, the question about SEA, PSEA, so prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. colleagues might know that all UN organizations now have a certain set of minimum standards that they need to ensure that their funded or implementing partners adhere to. There is a common assessment tool that is being rolled out by a number of UN organizations for all of the partners that we work with. It involves a self-assessment by the partner and then a process of validation by one of the UN organizations. That will give a rating of the level of compliance, and if there's a high rating, then that's great, and there's no obstacle, no additional requirements that are expected of the partner. If the assessment reveals that there's opportunity to improve, the partner has a year in which to make the necessary improvements for future agreements. If a partner should fail to adhere to one particular standard, which is a failure to take action when there is a proven case of sexual exploitation and abuse, then that will prohibit the partner from future partnership opportunities with any UN organization. But hopefully we won't see many of those cases. The idea is that the assessments would be conducted by one organization, and then other UN organizations would mutually recognize that assessment. The idea there is that we don't want partner organizations to jump over multiple hurdles when we can benefit from one another's assessments. And the third point is, how can we ensure that the assessments of capacity and risk are shared with partners? Whenever one of our auditing firms conducts what's called an internal control questionnaire of a partner organization, the partner organization receives the results of that internal control questionnaire. So we want to be absolutely sure that there is complete transparency here, and that the partner has the opportunity to correct anything that needs to be corrected, and that they can benefit from that. So I hope I've addressed all of those, albeit very quickly, Angahar.
Excellent. Yes, indeed. Thank you so much. And I do hope that we will have time to come back to you for a few more questions at the end, because we do have more coming in. So thanks so much, Rob. I'd like to turn next to Tobias, responsible for grants management, capacity building, and overall grant risk management for a large INGO. Your work includes looking at the decision-making about whether to accept funding from donors or partnership agreements from the UN. Could you tell us a bit more about the role of risk management in how you handle such questions? Over to you, Tobias.
Thank you so much. That's a great question. And what I wanted to start with, wanted to provide a bigger picture in terms of accepting grants and what we do as an organization. And the first thing is really, as an organization, every organization, I would assume that, an organization has got a strategic objective or strategic objectives or some strategic focus. And so that's the good place to start with, because there are a lot of opportunities out there, in terms of the grant funding or opportunities. There are a lot of them out there. And so if you don't focus, if you don't look at the strategic objectives that you have as an organization, then you'll be able to go for everything that is there on the market. And so sometimes, NGOs, in order for them to be able to balance up with their funding, they may end up, or they may get tempted to be able to go for any available funding, even if it doesn't align to the strategic objectives. And so it's really important to set standards, to set policies within the organization to ensure that, any opportunity that you go for is actually aligned to your strategic objectives or strategic forecast. And your strategic objectives are your strengths. These are your organization capabilities that you've been able to build over a period of time, and that you can be able to market to the donor, that you are able to implement the project with less risk. And so looking at that from that angle, it's really very important. The other one, it's really being deliberate as an organization to define what's your optimal funding mix. As an organization, sometimes you get grant funds, but you may also be getting different funding types. And so as you look at that different funding types with the grants that may be available, defining as an organization what should be the optimal funding mix. One type of funding may be riskier, may be more risky than the other one. And so you want to be able to balance up the risk. What type of funding are we going to be able to go for? What should be the optimal mix that we need to be able to accept as an organization? So it's really important for the organization from the onset to be able to define that, so that when opportunities come, you know what to go for and you know what you should not be able to go for. So those, the optimal funding mix will be your parameters in terms of really curbing any potential risk that you may be exposed to. The other one I would say is... Sorry.
Sorry, go right ahead, Tobias. I thought you were stopping, but go right ahead.
All right, okay. So the other one I would say is really being able to define and do the donor mapping. And in a given country, if you are in Afghanistan, who are the donors that are there in Afghanistan? Who are the donors that are there in Indonesia, in Kenya, or elsewhere? So being able to define your donors and understand the donors that are there, that are prevalent in your context, and understanding what are some of their key requirements of these particular donors. So that's a good place to be able to start with as you think through in terms of what sort of donors can we go for, and what are some of the risks that you may be able to, those donors may be able to pose. So let me stop there. I know Jeremy talked about the organizational risk appetite that you covered already in the past.
Yes, thank you. So one quick follow-up question, Tobias. We were wondering, is there a difference between how you approach the risk analysis for UN partnerships versus government donor grants?
Sure, there are differences, and let me share this slide and I'll talk through some of those ones. As you look at different donors that you have within any context that you may be in, a lot of donors they have, as Bob was sharing, a lot of donors they have different assessments that they perform. And these assessments, sometimes they are shared, at times they are not shared, unfortunately. But these assessments that the donors perform, really, it's a very good starting point for an organization to be able to say, how do we translate the assessments that the donors have, that they have on us as implementing agencies? How can we translate these ones into our own internal control self-assessment tool? And so one of the things that we do is to have that internal self-assessment, internal control self-assessment tool. And these, any self-assessment tool can be very subjective. And so validation for that is really very critical, and ensuring that you bring in other stakeholders to be able to validate what you are saying in that self-assessment tool. It's really very important. Every donor wants to be assured that there are appropriate internal controls within the organization. And so as you look at different donors, being able to have that and review those key issues that may come up from the self-assessment control. It's important for you to be able to do that. Now, the other one is the due diligence. Oftentimes, we do due diligence in terms of working with the partners, or when you're purchasing items, from the supplier or the vendors and so on and so forth, or maybe when we're recruiting a staff, we do a lot of those due diligence. But however, it's important for us to ensure that, for the UN, you don't need to do a due diligence for the UN in terms of whether the UN is an ethical agency or so. And the EU and the World Bank and so on and so forth, and the other institutions that are providing funding, the US government. So those ones and the Global Fund, those ones, those are international institutions. However, there may be certain donors that we are dealing with that we may not be too sure in terms of whether they are involved in ethical businesses. And so it's important for an organization, and particularly in the age that we are in now, that we need to ensure that we screen or we run some due diligence to ensure that the organization that is going to be providing the funding, it's ethical, and as an organization, you need to be able to set your own parameters. What would be acceptable to you, and what would be what would be a red flag, that a red zone that you'll not be able to go into. And so set those parameters and ensure that you are performing a due diligence on any potential donors, that before you go for those donors, that you have actually been able to perform a due diligence. And some of the international institutions such as the UN, EU, World Bank, and the others, they do have a list of individuals or companies that they would not want you to do business with. And so it's important for you as part of the organization to set processes and the procedures on how you can search against that list to ensure that you don't end up in a situation that will compromise and have an organizational reputation. The other very important step as well, and what can be done, is the go no go decision. As you look at different agencies or donors that are there, it's important for an organization internally to ensure that you have a go no go decision. When do you say yes to this particular donor? What are the parameters that are in there? And so your go no go decision should look into issues like the technical expertise that you've been able to set within the organization. Do you have technical expertise to do that? Will this donor be able to pay for the overhead costs, for instance? Does your office have any prior issues that may be able to expose you not to be able to implement this project very well? It could also be, as Jeremy mentioned, the donor requirements. Is the organization prepared to be able to comply with these particular donor requirements? So your go no go decision should encompass all those things, and it's not limited to that, but you need to be able to define what should be your red zone and the red flag that you can be able to set up and say, I think we'll not be able to go for that. But also, who are some of the stakeholders that are involved in that process? The decision rights are very critical, and you need to be able to have a wider stakeholder that you can be able to engage with. The other part with that is that, as Rob mentioned, is that there are times that, you have to work with the partners, particularly if you're an international organization, you may have to work with the partners. And you could see from the analysis that he shared that there's a lot of money that UNHCR is providing to local agencies, to the local organizations, those that are local registered organization. And so as international organizations, it's important to be able to work with those local partners. And this is a commitment, like, for instance, World Vision under the grant bargaining that we had also committed to. And so in that aspect, if you're going to go for a grant and that grant requires you that you work with the partners, are you prepared to work with the partners? Do you have relationship with the partners? Do you have good partners on the ground that you can be able to work with and have less issues in terms of complying with that particular donor? So you need to be able to look at that, and of course, performing due diligence on the partners. It's very important, as well as assessing the risk and the capacity of those partners. It's also very critical. Let me stop there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Tobias. We do have a few questions coming in, and I'd like to pose a couple more of those now before we move on. So we'll try to be brief with the responses. I know it can be challenging. But first, we have a question from Philip. So Philip is trying to help clarify the terminology that's being used in the discussion, and he is requesting speakers to say a bit more about whether their organizations have different teams or roles for donor engagement, so winning funds, deciding to accept funding, for implementation risk, so looking at capacity of partners, and for reporting and demonstrating adherence to grant rules risk. And he's wondering if you could perhaps speak in a bit more detail to what kind of role or what kind of team you belong to, or what kind of different teams exist in your organization, simply to help understand the landscape. So over to you with that question, Tobias.
All right, okay, briefly, I'll be able to say, thank you so much for that question. So briefly, I'll be able to say that within our setup, we do have teams that work with the external engagements with the donors and so on. And these teams, they are also involved in the resource mobilization and resource acquisition. And so when they hear of an opportunity, they alert we have a system in place where they'll be able to inform the leadership, and there is a go or no go decision that is made on that particular opportunity. And so the go or no go decision, it entails there are different stakeholders that are actually involved in the process. And you have the finance, you have the legal, you have the program staff, and so on that are involved in that process. And so that's from the perspective of acquisition
Okay, we may have to move on, and hopefully we'll be able to fix that little glitch with the connection to Tobias soon. So thanks so much, Tobias. We're going to be coming back to you with another question once we get you back on the line. I would like to turn now, so having heard from Rob and Tobias, I'd like to turn now to Mohammed next to tell us about his perspectives on this issue from the context of Pakistan. Mohammed, I'd like to ask you first, in your capacity as the director of an NGO in Pakistan, when considering whether to take on funding from a donor or a partnership agreement with a UN agency, what factors do you consider, and how does risk management play a role in that consideration on your part? Over to you, Mohammed.
I don't have presentation, but I'll speak from my experiences and the practice and from my heart. So we don't have a choice even. And let me explain that why. The local organization, basically their survival is, especially of the humanitarian organization, are on the basis of like projects. So what happens when there is any emergency comes in, these organizations has to apply for funding, and mostly where the problem comes in when we are not involved in the design phase. And there are pre-design calls from the donors. So we have list choice. And we have list choices because we don't have internal funding for sustenance of our organization. So this is the bottom bit. For due diligence, what is happening? This is very one-sided in this tradition system. The funder or the lead partner are always assessing the implementing partner, or as we call it, local organization. But for implementation of their project and for as mentioned, our risk tolerance. But never ever it happened that we are provided an opportunity to assess our lead partner and do their due diligence, whether they are capable to manage partnership and support us or not. So this is very one-way process. Secondly, usually the programming has been done and there are the funding has been prioritized before it is reaching to us. When the donors are opening their calls, our lead partners, so they have a set of activities and they have set their objectives and goals. And as we are facing the pressure of communities, the affected communities we are living in, so usually the local organizations are desperate to apply for. And there are always a go. There is very less time we are going for no. So this is another dilemma we are facing. Thirdly, in risk management, as we are not involved in the design phase, as we are not involved in the budgetary negotiation, it is most of the time one way. So most of the time it is risk shifting to the local partner. Risk management can be done from both sides, but in this very case, especially in the acute humanitarian situation, we are facing this issue. Fourth one is, like in humanitarian situation, we are dealing with multiple partners. They have their multiple reporting mechanism, financial and narrative. And we have to, because of the compliance issue, we have to respond to all the different formats and to their different system. So it increases our risk as a local partner. Sometimes the organization, we are specialized in few sectors. So we are always opting for those sectors, and we are, sometimes we are by choice not going to some donors or to some sector. Or if there is any access issue, or there any political issue with that donor. Otherwise, the local organization, because we are not being provided any multi-year humanitarian funding, and when the humanitarian situation get over, so no lead partner or UN agencies, they are keeping that relation, nor they are supporting us in normal or peacetime. So what happened? Our capacity depleted, and as emergency come again, so then they are putting pressure, and we have to, because we are facing pressure from the community as well and from our respective government. So this is some of the bottleneck of the current system. Thirdly, we are very much appreciating the UNHCR move, because UNHCR has taken lead while providing the local partner 4% integrity and support cast. The other UN agencies are not doing that. But even then, there is a disparity. They are giving 7% to the international organization who are already resourceful. But at least for this 4%, we are thankful. And we are requesting other UN agencies and donors to follow the suit and provide long-term humanitarian, multi-humanitarian funding to the local and national organization so that they can continue with their offices and they can keep their capacity and their staff. Third one is like the disparity among the salaries. Once a professional joins us, so it's like a primary school for the professional. When they get capacitated, so usually their option is UN or INGO because of the salary packages. Our salary packages are quite low as compared to the international and UN agencies. So this is another bottleneck in the system that make us in the over compliances. Let me tell you a big problem we are facing this time in the traditional system. We have lost our philanthropic at the national level, because before we were working a lot but with small offices and small setups. When we get interacted with the donors and the INGOs and the UN agency, they have a lot of compliances requirement. And now we had to hire different professionals. We have to have our offices in the clean and green areas and security clean areas. For that matter, it distances us from our own philanthropic community in our own countries. And what happened? It increases our dependency on the donor funding. While on the other side, the donors are treating, or the lead partner, even the UN agencies, they are treating us project-based. When the project comes in, their support, if there is any for the organization, it gets started. When the project ends, then there is no relationship remain to support that local organization. So the whole burden is on the local and national organization for compliance. What is the practical way out to resolve these issues? We are requesting for equitable partnership. If you are bringing funding, we are bringing our hearts and minds, and most of the time sweat and bloods, our lives at risk in the conflict and Kuwait situation especially. We want that Netflix Edmund Cast, which our intermediaries are receiving from the donors, it should be cascading to the local partner, as well as the flexibility in funding. Because again, we have been caught in the situation, if we design a project sometime, the time of the funding coming into the ground is always taking few months, and the ground realities get changed in the acute emergency so very often. So we are not independent to change the design of the project we proposed before, or the set of activity proposed by the lead partner. And then we are then compromising at the needs of the community because the response is not appropriate. So we are demanding that the flexibility should be cascaded. The third one is long-term partnership. If there is project, if there is no project. If there is emergency, if there is no emergency. We need permanent relationship. We need permanent capacity sharing, both ways. And we need to be involved in the design phase, in the budget negotiation, as an equal partner, because we know the needs of the community, and communities and people must be at the center. And the risk is where the risk comes when either our design is not appropriate, or the timing is, or if the funding is because of the political priorities, not because of the humanitarian imperative. It is not only related to the internal system. For internal system, we are requesting time and again, and this is a subject of the grand bargain, that we need harmonized, simplified and standardized reporting mechanism. If we are reporting to 12 partners, so we are reporting on 12 format. So why not the donors and the lead partner are sitting together and devise a common financial and reporting mechanism? Every organization have their own financial system. So we are at the receiving end. It increases our risk. So we are requesting for a simplified, harmonized reporting format, as well as for the due diligence process. The story starts from the due diligence. If the due diligence process is not accurate, if it is not appropriate, so the risk maximize. If it is appropriate, and if it is periodic, if in 2-3 years, if not every year, we can assist each other periodically. If the situation is normal even, then we need a permanent relationship. We need permanent capacity sharing to minimize the risk. While answering your question, I'll say we have a less scope to say no to the donor. This is a harsh reality. But in extreme cases, if their design is quite opposite to the need of our people, so we are saying no. Otherwise, local partners are facing the problem of their sustainability. So they have less option. So for that matter, if we will be given integrity at support cost, as UNHCR has at least started something to the local partner, so it will make us able to say no and to take a stand and to be on the equal table. I'll welcome any question in this regard. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mohammed. We do indeed have quite a few questions that have come in, and I hope to be able to get to quite a few of those. To start out with, however, we have a great question that's come in from Philip that is building on what you've been saying, Mohammed, but I'd like to actually bring Rob and Tobias just briefly again into the discussion here, and then I'm going to come back to you, Mohammed. So Philip writes the following: Mohammed describes a frustrating situation for capable implementers. How has the UN or organizations such as World Vision seen them or other donors improve on this situation? I once was part of a local health NGO, and if we had poor access to a funder to design the response, for example, we would choose not to go for their funds. So I wonder if I could turn first to Rob and then to Tobias for just some brief reflections on this point from Philip, building on Mohammed, and then I'm going to turn back to Mohammed. So first you, Rob, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Anga, and thanks, Mohammed, and thanks, colleagues. No, unfortunately, what Mohammed has described so eloquently is a problem that we've heard for at least the last couple of years, and we have indeed been trying to make the needed reforms to alleviate some of that frustrating situation that Mohammed and other colleagues in his circumstance find themselves in. Mohammed's referenced the 4% support that we provide. We call it this funny thing called PICSC, but it is 4%. It's still a relatively small percentage, but it does contribute some flexible funding, and we would certainly love to be able to be in a position to increase that. But one also needs to think about what happens with the other 96% and how much flexibility is one given within that 96% to actually use the money for in a different way, but for the purposes of achieving the same intended result, but to use that 96% in a flexible way to correspond to the most effective manner of delivery. And that's where we are trying to ensure that, at least in our agreements, we give the maximum amount of flexibility to the partner to be able to use that 96% as they see fit throughout the implementation period. So I hear what Mohammed says about the need for collaboration during the planning phase, and I certainly don't disagree with that at all, but we should also not rely too heavily on an assumption that any plan is going to be robust and not have to be changed, and there can't be course correction during the year as well. So I think what Mohammed is describing demonstrates that there is a need for improvement across the entire partnership life cycle. One final point is that we are, like I would expect almost everybody on this call, we are all of one voice when it comes to trying to insist that the upstream donors, we get most of our support from member states of the UN, we are asking all of them to contribute multi-year unearmarked contributions. And we will see great potential for much more effective partnerships, long-term strategic, long-term partnerships with organizations of all shapes and sizes if we have more unearmarked multi-year contributions. It is difficult for us when we're also receiving money on a primarily annual basis, and it's very difficult for us to commit funding beyond just that 1 year. I could go on, but I'll pause there so as not to hog the microphone. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Rob. And turning to Tobias, do you have anything that you can add on these points? Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Just to add on what Rob has said, some of the key things that we are doing from our end, it's really developing healthy relationship with the partners. We do recognize that partnership is relational. So we can't go in there in a partnership with a big brother mentality. And so we need to be able to treat each other with that mutual respect. And what we've seen sometimes is that as you begin to work with the partners at the beginning and you do the assessment, sometimes I like the way Mohammed has been able to express it's really from a very good, honest place. But sometimes when you're working with the partners, you'd find that at times information that you were giving at the beginning or the perception is not what is on the ground later on. And so it becomes very difficult in the course of that. But I think it's really good if you go in there with a clear, honest perspective, and also as the international NGOs to really be relational and work as mutual partners. And in so doing, you are able to like for some of the tools that we use in the assessment, we use the risk assessment capacity building tool, and that tool really helps us to be able to develop a plan where we see that there are areas or where there are gaps, to develop a plan and be able to work with a particular partner, and that has really helped us to develop stronger relationship on the field level. But we do realize and understand the pain that at times that the partners they go through, and but we can be able to work. I think there are opportunities to work together and develop stronger relationship that are mutual.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tobias. And now, Mohammed, turning back to you, we do have a number of questions that have come in. I'd like to pose this one from Nellie. She writes, hi, Mohammed, do you constantly give this kind of feedback to your funding partners on the need to be part of the design? Because even in a partnership model, programs do have to be conceived with the partners and communities, and you are sometimes the main link to the communities. So are you engaging with the coordination processes and feeding into the country humanitarian planning, including bringing up these issues? Over to you, Mohammed.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. It is very relevant. What we are doing in Pakistan. We have a network of humanitarian organization that is called National Humanitarian Network of Pakistan. So we have listed down the specialized NGO sector-wise, their capacities assessment we have done ourselves, and we are providing that list to the donors, to the lead partner, and to the UN agencies. And we have requested OCHA for any emergency situation. They can contact and they can pre-select, and the due diligence can be done beforehand. And we are facilitating the organization how they can write a proposal in emergency situation. So the result was we started from 13% in the country-based pool funding, and we ended up in 83%. Funding is now going to the local organization. Even the two calls last year went 100% to the local organization. This is one. We are contributing, and we are fair and square with our donor, with the UN agencies, and we are part of the HCT. And we are speaking as we are speaking here. So we are part of the HRP. Yesterday we launched HRP, Humanitarian Response Plan of Pakistan, approved by the government of Pakistan, and the local civil society was very much part of the design, very much part of the whole process, and even the launch. So yes, we have gained power through networking among ourselves, and now we are lobbying not only within the country for equitable partnership, but in START Network, in EQUA, in Grand Bargain, in OPEC, in annually in humanitarian advisory group by fora by the United Nations. So we are continuously knocking the the doors of the donors and the lead partner, and helping them devise a mechanism so that the system can be transparent, equitable, and risk can be minimized. And how we can, we are now trying risk financing model in Pakistan, so that how we can shift the risk to the financial institution. So we have piloted that and we are doing that very successfully. So yes, this is on our side. We are doing that and we will be doing it. But we need cooperation from your side, from the donor side, to take risk, to help us develop a harmonized due diligence system, to simplify the reporting system so that we can use our energy on our communities rather than on the reporting purposes and on the compliance issues. Yes, compliance is very much necessary with the bare minimum we are agreed with, and we are accepting that risk. But overburdening our local organization is not justifiable, and at the end, blacklisting of a local organization is not the solution for the risk management. Because in due diligence, one of my brothers said, in due diligence, the organization are not showing their capacity correctly. Why? If you will have a permanent relationship with that organization, and if you are periodically assessing the organization, so there will be no need and there will be no surprises of such type of thing. But the relationship is very much project-based. So that's why we are often face this type of surprises. And as I said, the capacity is depleting of the local organization, because we are graduating people and they are joining the INGOs and the UN very speedily, and we are recruiting the new one. Look at our salary packages. Our project manager is getting less than a salary of a driver in the UN agency, and the packages he has or she has. So there is a huge comparison. We need to decrease down the salary packages so that we can retain our capacity, and you will not be caught in the surprise after the due diligence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Really interesting points that you're able to share with us. I'd like to pose one more question to you, if I may. This is coming in from Lucia, and building a bit on what you've been speaking about regarding expectations of others. So Lucia writes, in your experience in challenges as well as benefits for national and local NGOs to receive funding, what would you expect from international NGOs in terms of risk sharing and capacity strengthening? Over to you, Mohammed.
I said it before, like capacity building. We invested millions and millions and millions. Let's be fair. And I don't see, even in Pakistan, we have international organization who had like multiple partners. But in my life, my professional life of 25 years, they never ever graduated a single organization to be directly funded by their own donor. So now, as we have changed the term of capacity sharing, what we are expecting from them? Technical backstopping. Because we don't have reach to the big capitals. So they can do fundraising. They can do global advocacy. And they can transfer the knowledge they are gathering from the globe. This is the time they should act as an academies, because for the last 60, 70 years, they have accumulated best practices and this knowledge from different parts of the world. We, the local organization, need not to reinvent the wheel. Now, our international actors, our international NGOs, they should transfer that knowledge to the local organization and make them capable of raising funding in their own country. We are thinking of how we can localize our donors, how we can again go to our communities and our philanthropic base so that we can have a match grant from within our country, how we can build a trust of our own private sector. We need to know how they did it in UK, how they did this in Ireland, how they did this in their own country. I need not to be idea I'm working in. Idea need not to be Oxfam in Pakistan. Idea need not to be Concern Worldwide and Care International or UNICEF in Pakistan with the big offices and a lot of vehicles and the rest. Idea want to be gradually growing. How they have grown 30 years, 20 years ago. Everybody is assessing us as they are. UNICEF is assessing us as UNICEF are. WHO is assessing us as WHO is. Care International or Oxfam are concerned, or any other NGOs are assessing us according to their system, and they expect us to be at their level. No, there should be a tiered due diligence system whereby we can be assessed according to our size and capacity. And we are expecting that we will be funding accordingly. We need not to, idea need not to be funding in millions and millions and millions. We refuse big funding because we said we cannot absorb it. This is not our stage to absorb millions and millions of funding and utilize that properly. So what I mean to say, we need to work on the due diligence system, and the organization must be assessed what we are expecting from them. If they are a village level organization, we can deal them. We can devise a due diligence mechanism as we are expecting from a village level organization. The same is the case with the district and provincial level organization. That's why we are working with the START network on tier due diligence system, so that everybody can be assessed according to their capacity and they can be supported. There should be no to any organization in partnership, but a partnership according to their level and their capacity, their level of capacity and their risk, according to their risk tolerance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. Very much appreciate your responses, and I see you've inspired a lot of discussion as well in the chat, which is terrific, as well as some terrific input from participants to the two polls. So that'll be a great resource for many of us to go back to and read in more detail some of the thoughts from everyone else's experience, and I think also inspired from what they've heard from all of our panelists here today. So with that, we are unfortunately rapidly approaching the end of our allotted time here. I'd like to turn to my co-host, Jeremy, to help start to wrap things up and share with us a few main takeaways. And afterwards, Jeremy, I hope then we'll be able to do a very quick round across the panel for brief concluding thoughts from our panelists. But first to you, Jeremy, for a few concluding points.
Great, thanks, Ingrid. And I think I think the participants would agree that this has been a quite rich discussion here today. Some very interesting questions and interesting presentations as well. We never intend these webinars to be the final word on the matter, but I think that's obvious today that it's part of an ongoing discussion. One of the points I was going to say in conclusion is that this is in fact intended to be the final webinar in this particular series. However, I would say it's clear just from the discussion today that there's an ongoing need to support this topic, particularly when it comes to developing the relational aspect of partnership and consideration of risk and how that fits in there. So it's, although it might be the final webinar of the series, it's not the end to our focus in the risk management area. And I think one of the pieces of work that we're carrying forward over the next few weeks is to do an internal assessment on how we can shift the discussion to cover some of these more technical and substantive topics, particularly at the field level going forward. So look for some more follow-up on that in general from ICFA moving forward. In conclusion for today, just a few very brief points. I think we've heard some quite interesting feedback from our speakers. Certainly both coming from Mohammed and Tobias's presentations, some of the concepts that we have in risk management around due diligence, for example, we frequently think of as downward approaches rather than using them as part of a two-way relationship in a funding relationship, partnership, etc. So I thought it was very helpful to be thinking about some of these technical concepts like due diligence, for example, not as a one-way downward-facing tool, but as part of a two-way relationship in which it's important to consider how we use risk management tools to support that relationship. So helpful that we, I think about that moving forward, how to use risk management tools as part of a relationship with our funders, other stakeholders, not just as technical elements of a one-way relationship. I thought also some very good points emerging around this concept of risk transfer, risk sharing. And this is something that, again, that we can look forward to in upcoming discussions. I think certainly as part of the grand bargain and some of the discussion taking place with donors in that forum. This concept of shifting from risk transfer, just always downward shifting of risk towards smaller and smaller partners, transforming that into more of a risk sharing approach where partners, stakeholders throughout the humanitarian system retain and manage risk at their levels as appropriate, transferring only what's necessary. I think shifting towards that type of thinking is really a critical piece of the discussion moving forward. And I thought Mohammed in particular highlighted that need quite well in his sharing. And I think I can stop there. Maybe my final thought is just, again, this concept of risk management has certainly been around for some time, but is growing in interest and application in the humanitarian space. And really important that we think about it as an opportunity. Not just that we start doing risk management as a technical exercise, but it's an opportunity to think about how we can use risk management skills as part of a relationship between INGOs, between national partners, between funders and NGO partners of all sizes. So really encourage people to look at the opportunity that exists in using risk management skills, tools, etc., to support good relationships in humanitarian response, and ultimately to better serve the people that we're hopefully there to serve as part of our work. So just encourage us to think about that opportunity moving forward. I think that's it for me. Back over to you, Ingrid.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeremy. And thanks so much for all of your work in putting together not only today's webinar, but also the series. I think it really has been very valuable. And I hope that those of you on the line who were not present in the previous sessions will consider going to take a look at the recordings because this has not been the only rich discussion on this topic. And I think there's really a lot to take out of the whole series. So now as we've reached the end, I'd like to go one more time around the virtual room and ask each of our panelists for just a few brief closing thoughts, reacting either to any of the questions or chat discussions that you've seen going past on the screen, or of course to anything you've heard from your other colleagues on the line. So let's go first to Tobias, and then we will move to Mohammed and Rob. So Tobias, you have the floor.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you everyone that connected to the event today. I just wanted to reiterate and say I think it's important moving forward for us to collaborate more the NGOs and local NGOs, as well as the donor agencies, that we need to be able to collaborate more to minimize the burden on the local NGOs on numerous assessments that are required to be done, and we can share that information around. But I also wanted to reiterate the need for any agency going for donor funding, that it's important to be able to review the agreement. If you don't agree with any terms of the agreement, don't sign, don't go for it if you can't be able to implement it. And so it's important to go to really look at get the legal team or your legal advisor to look at the agreement and ensure that you'll be able to implement the project. That would minimize a huge risk from you. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you.
Thank you very much, Tobias. It was great to have you on the line. And now turning to Mohammed for some brief closing thoughts.
Thank you. I think this is a very important topic, and we need to have a permanent dialogue on it. And we need to devise some practical ways for this problem, what I mentioned and my other colleagues they have commented on. Though there is improvement in the sector, and there is a dialogue, like the Grand Bargain platform or ECWA, or your platform, or there are other platforms, but we need to have a continuous, frank and free dialogue at country levels as well. Because we are the local partners, they are dealing with the country offices of the donor, we are dealing with the country offices of the UN agencies, we are dealing with the country offices of the INGOs. We don't have that reception at the country level. So I hope there will be a continuous dialogue, and there will be a top-down approach of cascading approach of the openness, of the change of behavior and attitude toward local organization. Thank you all once again.
Thank you, Mohammed, for being part of this important discussion. And now, Rob, over to you for your concluding thoughts.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not sure that I can offer anything that compares to what has just been said by Mohammed. Certainly, that is what we would also like to see. I really do always like to come back to our recommitment to the principles of partnership, and I think it will be a good indicator of our success when we are described by local partners as indeed a partner as opposed to a donor. I think it is a very important distinction, and I will take pride in knowing that we've been successful when we've been able to change that dynamic in the language and really truly be felt to be operating and practicing the principles of partnership. Thanks to ICFA, thanks to yourselves, Angahad and colleagues, for this opportunity. Much appreciated. Looking forward to continuing this dialogue.
As are we. Thank you very much, Rob, and what an excellent note to end today's discussion on. So thanks so much to all of our panelists once again, to my co-host Jeremy, the teams behind the scenes at ICFA and PHAP, and huge thanks to all of our participants on the line today. Really active discussion and some great feedback through those polls. We will have a recording of the event so you can relive the experience or share it with colleagues at your leisure, either in video or in audio-only podcast format. That will be available on the event page in the coming days. Also, we will be following up with our speakers to see if they can help to answer some of the additional questions that came in during the event that we did not have time to address in real time during the session today. We'll be posting those in the PHAP community, where you can all continue the discussion until the next event. And speaking of which, we would like to remind you that the next learning series will take place after the summer that will be focusing on climate, environment, and humanitarian action. So with that, we'd like to once again thank everyone, panelists and participants, for a very interesting discussion and look forward to seeing you online again in the near future. This is Angharad Lang signing off from Geneva. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.